You know, everyone assumes the AI boom is just this clean story about shiny compute processors. But looking at Lam Research this quarter, ticker LRCX for the record, today's April 22nd, 2026, and they just proved it's actually about the massive memory layers feeding those processors. And apparently, the only thing capping global chip equipment growth right now is literal real estate. Customers are just completely out of clean room floor space.
Yeah, which is exactly why they raised their entire market forecast. I mean, the wafer fab equipment market, WFE, they now model it hitting $140 billion this year. And they explicitly said there is an upside bias. The demand is there. It is just sitting around waiting on physical concrete to dry in these factories.
It is totally wild. Oh, and real quick, I almost forgot our favorite legal housekeeping. Everything you hear on Earnings Unscripted is just our personal opinion and definitely not financial advice. So please do not make huge life decisions off our podcast banter.
Or do, but please don't blame us.
Exactly. But getting back to the print, the market obviously loved this structural constraint story. The stock had a massive spike in extended hours. It touched over 285 at one point and settled up around 5.5% at 272.44. And the underlying numbers justify it. We are looking at a record non-GAAP EPS of $1.47. Total revenue was, $5.84 billion, which is up 9% sequentially.
Right, except the margins are the real standout metric. Because if you think about what Lam actually does, they build these hyper-complex vacuum systems, the etch and deposition tools that basically carve silicon at the atomic level. And foundries have soaked up all the capital lately, but this quarter, memory equipment just surged to 39% of system revenue.
So the memory sector is finally catching up to the whole logic processor hype cycle?
Exactly. Well, it has to. The token economics of AI models are pushing infrastructure demands way past just the GPU. You need aggressive storage expansion to keep the chips fed. So Lam is seeing this. It's roughly a $40 billion industry upgrade to high-layer NAND structures, and it's being pulled forward massively. It was originally modeled to stretch out to 2027. Now it is literally happening today.
Okay, but I want to square something here. If you are rushing to pull an upgrade cycle forward and you physically have no floor space left, how are they expanding non-GAAP operating margins to 35%? That seems totally backwards. You would think constraints ruin your efficiency.
That is the engineering side of the business flexing. They are aggressively automating the physical fab maintenance. There was this amazing little detail on the call about Dextro. It's this collaborative robot arm they put straight into the factory aisle.
Oh, right. The cobot.
Yeah, the cobot. Usually when one of these vacuum chambers needs maintenance, you stop the machine, a human goes in, maybe makes a tiny physical placement error, and you lose yield. They took this Dextro robot, packed it with 10 times the computing power of the old version, and it just handles the servicing. Unprecedented precision, so they get first-time right repairs, and it immediately compounds the customer output.
That is amazing. We're talking about these $50 billion macro headwinds, and the hero of the margin story is a tiny robotic arm named Dextro, quietly fixing things in the dark. But I know you were digging into the actual cash flow and some strange workforce charges hiding behind those margins. All right, let's get into the details.
Right. So if you just glance at the cash flow statement, you might actually get spooked. Operating cash flow slipped. It went from basically $1.5 billion down to $1.1 billion quarter over quarter. Free cash flow dropped too.
Which, hold on, that makes zero sense if systems revenue is jumping 11%.
No, exactly. But it is basically a mirage. They took $750 million in cash straight off the balance sheet to gracefully retire unsecured notes. No refinancing in a choppy rate environment, just paid it off.
Wow. Okay, that is a massive liquidity flex.
It is capital discipline. You save a ton of interest expense going forward. But you mentioned those workforce charges earlier, and that is where the margin story gets a little, well, complicated. They excluded roughly $23 million in workforce optimization activities from their non-GAAP numbers.
Which usually means layoffs, right? Severance packages, downsizing.
Sure, except they actually added 900 people to the headcount broadly. So it's not a traditional downsizing.
Oh, interesting. So they are cutting somewhere just to hire elsewhere.
Precisely. They're explicitly pivoting. You squeeze out the lower value legacy support talent and reallocate those salaries toward high-end AI research. It's an efficiency squeeze. But the other shoe dropping on the legacy business is buried in the balance sheet under deferred revenue.
Oh, the customer down payments. I saw that. That dropped to a 4-year low. It was roughly $300 million less, I think.
Right. And you have to ask why prepayments are vanishing while WFE demand is allegedly sky high. The CFO, Doug Bettinger, had a great line on the call about this. He said, down payments tend to come from smaller customers, and a lot of them are in the China region. Those two things are correlated together.
Ah, okay, so that is the silent shrink. As the massive global multinationals take up all the capacity, the domestic Chinese clients are naturally getting pushed to the back seat, and the big guys just don't have to prepay.
They absolutely do not, which is why Lam's overall dependency on the China region, which sits at 34% right now, is basically guaranteed to taper next quarter. It's a very clean geographical pivot hiding inside a boring accounting line.
It's funny how much of the real narrative is just buried in the footnotes. Like, you see margin expansion, but under the hood, they're aggressively reskilling the workforce and quietly de-risking their geographic footprint.
And pushing the boundaries of what's possible with their physical tools, too. Actually, there's one more detail about demand intensity that blew my mind. The CEO, Tim Archer, mentioned an unnamed customer literally halted an active middle-of-production ramp line. They completely stopped production.
Wait, they stopped a live fab line? That's insane. The downtime cost alone would be staggering.
Millions, but they stopped it exclusively to rip out an existing vendor's tooling and install Lam's Keo conductor etch systems, just because the Lam tools generated fundamentally better defect performance under load. When your yields are everything, you stop the line to get the better tool.
I mean, talk about a sales pitch. Just yank out the competitor's multi-million-dollar machine mid-cycle.
It shows you how desperate these foundries are for perfect yield right now. There's zero tolerance for error when the chips are this expensive.
So where does all this leave them heading into the rest of the year? Because if they're swapping tools mid-ramp and casually paying off massive debts with cash, their internal outlook has to be fascinating.
The internal outlook is honestly almost uncomfortably aggressive. They are guiding June quarter revenue up to $6.6 billion, and non-GAAP operating margins are slated to hit 36.5%, which is actually kind of hilarious.
Wait, hilarious. Why? Because I thought 36% was like phenomenally good.
It is, except their own stated long-term corporate target is 35%. They basically shattered their own multi-year model, and now analysts are completely blind to where the ceiling actually sits. When someone pressed the CFO on the call for a real margin model, he literally just said, I would encourage you to kind of keep it roughly in the levels we just guided you to. They just, totally punted on giving a formal update until later this year.
Okay. But that feels like a classic peak cycle warning flag. When management breaks through the roof but refuses to sketch out a new one, you kind of have to assume they see a cliff ahead. What is the actual catch here?
The catch is entirely tied to that $40 billion NAND pull forward we mentioned. They are betting the rest of the year on the idea that data centers will endlessly buy up QLC storage for these AI models. If the token economics somehow fail to justify that, or, if hyperscalers even slightly taper their capital spend, that entire WFE upside for 2026 just collapses.
Right. So it always comes back to the hyperscalers paying the bills. It feels like Lam is perfectly executing the engineering on the factory floor, but they are still essentially strapped to an AI rocket they do not steer.
Exactly that. It is a perfectly calibrated control system stuck inside a totally irrational macro environment. We will just have to see if the music is still playing next quarter.
An elegant machine just hoping nobody unplugs it. I think that is the perfect note to end on. Thank you for thinking out loud with us today, everyone. We'll catch you after the next call.
Just a quick reminder before we actually fade out. If you want these earnings drops to just magically show up in your feed, go ahead and follow the show. This whole project is driven by AI, which is exactly how we are able to compress those massive SEC filings down into a normal chat like this. We would absolutely love to hear what tickers you want us to dig into next. So drop your requests over to earningsunscripted@datamadness.ca or just grab the X link in the show notes.
Thanks for listening.